to the Done Deal Show. I'm joined live by Ben Jacobs. Lots to talk about today. Isak to Liverpool. We're looking at Eze and Arsenal. Sesko, Manchester United. Xavi and Chelsea. We'll be here for the next half an hour or so. So strap yourselves in, grab a drink, a bit of popcorn. There's lots to go through. Ben, how are you, mate?
Well, it's been a crazy day, probably the craziest of an already bonkers window. And here we are again with an Isak bid. So strap in because there's still 5 weeks of the window to go.
Absolutely. And we'll start with the Alexander Isak situation because some people are a little confused by the language, what's going on. The bid went in. They're not looking to bid again. Paul Joyce has said that's not the same as walking away. What's your latest, if you could kind of break down the way today's gone and the latest understanding of this current situation, that would be amazing, please.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's absolutely that no plans to bid and walking away are two slightly different things, and it's a long window. So there's still some hope, I suppose, for Liverpool fans and Liverpool generally to get Alexander Isak. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But the chronology is relatively simple. This morning, a first formal offer was made. It was 110 million fixed and no add-ons, to my understanding. And people are a bit surprised by that because it's not a British transfer record. It was lower than the 120 million that was discussed a few weeks ago by Liverpool to Newcastle. But of course, it's all money up front. So the structure of that deal, very preferable to Newcastle. And my understanding is that Liverpool actually went in quite optimistic and bid with confidence. And they were surprised that it was turned down so emphatically and so quickly. And if you think about that confidence, it's important because if you go in thinking there'll be engagement, you're going to go a bit lower and you're going to give Newcastle United the ability to say, make it a British transfer record, put some add-ons on it and so on. But actually, instead of it being a number that had Newcastle United saying, come to the table, they did the exact opposite. And in emphatic terms, and in only a matter of minutes, as far as I'm aware, turned it down without any feedback, without any number, without any counter. And this is why, as it stands, Liverpool have decided they have no plans to make a second bid as of now. Why as of now? And why is that different to pulling out entirely? Because, of course, there's 5 weeks left of the window, and there could be a scenario where Alexander Isak doubles down. Does he refuse to return to Newcastle? Does he refuse to be included in matchday squads? Do Newcastle find one or two attackers? And is there another window when Newcastle may change their perspective and say to Liverpool, now come and get the player? And that's the other crucial point within my exclusive. No plans to bid as it stands, but they will follow up if Newcastle say there is now encouragement. So what are the terms by which Newcastle may offer that encouragement? The first is replacements. The second is maybe more money. The third is Isak really driving a move. So this saga is not necessarily over, but as of now, Liverpool have no plans to make a second bid. And then the last thing, I think, as we said on previous shows, Terry, is that there are three options in all of this. First option, Isak stays. Second option, Isak extends and is allowed to leave in a year's time. Third option, he joins Liverpool. 4, 5, 6, 7 with Chelsea, with PSG, with Man United. Nothing in that. So there's three options in all of this. And we know that Isak's preference is to join Liverpool.
Yep.
But now I think there are two options because my sources tell me it is untenable that Isak could just stay. In other words, the possibility of Newcastle just saying no to every offer, shutting the door, Isak not signing a new deal. I'm told on the Isak side and on the Newcastle side that possibility is off the table, and Newcastle know that. So they've either got to get Isak to sign a new deal or they've got to engage with Liverpool Football Club. But the ability 6 months ago to say, you're well paid, you're well contracted, we've got Champions League football, we're going to do nothing, the window will shut, then you'll start playing. That, I'm told, is not a possibility anymore. It's seen as untenable on the Isak side. It's seen as untenable on the Newcastle side. So we're left with both extremes now. It's either going to be Morgan Gibbs-White, out of nowhere, new deal, or Liverpool will be back. But right now, that's not their plan. That's what I've reported. And that is where I believe we're at as of today.
Could it, in terms of, I totally get where you're coming from. If he isn't going to sign this new deal, then, Newcastle have got to be careful because they're in a position where The valuation will be lower next summer because he'll go into the last 2 years of his contract. They may not get the best out of him this season. There's no point having an asset that isn't delivering, who's also going to depreciate in value. And I think Newcastle will be very smart around that as well. In terms of Newcastle bringing somebody else in, though, because we know that and it kind of overlaps with the other subjects tonight, but also they're in for Sesko. A lot of the press, I think yourself also alluded to this. I read a lot of stories, though, that Newcastle wouldn't entertain selling Isak until a replacement was found. So let's say, for instance, Sesko tomorrow goes, I want Newcastle, or Watkins says, I fancy a bit of that. Could that change the scenario?
Yes, in short, because if Newcastle got in 2 attackers, Wissa Sesko, Wissa Watkins, Wissa Jackins, say sort of Wissa repeatedly, because that's the one that they feel the player's 100% sold. So if they can agree a package with Brentford, there's going to be no likelihood of a hijack or another club, unless, of course, Spurs come calling, which would present an interesting scenario. But I think if Newcastle got in a big name striker, it's not just that it might change the complexion. It's that there's always been a feeling over the last 2 weeks that that's pre-spending Isak money. So can Newcastle United afford to keep Alexander Isak and add a Jackson, a Watkins, etc.? Or is the outlay required for a forward of that magnitude actually prerequisite on the fact that Isak has to go? Now, some Newcastle fans will make the argument, but we put 70 million down for Hugo Ekitike. My read of that situation was that was also spending Isak money. And had they succeeded with Hugo Ekitike, then Alexander Isak would probably already be a Liverpool player. So I think there's an element of not just Newcastle finding a replacement, but if they spend serious money and wage on a Jackson or a Watkins in particular, and very possibly a Wissa too, they may likely offset that with their PSR position by needing to sell Alexander Isak. Of course, not in his entirety, but you pocket some of the money, you give yourself the ability to move freely over the next few windows, you get a replacement now, and Isak exits. But could they go and do Ollie Watkins on 250k a week and 60 million, or Sesko at 70 million plus wages and agent fees without ultimately selling Alexander Isak? I'm not so sure, because although they are PSR compliant, perhaps not by that kind of leeway for the magnitude of the names that I mentioned, especially if it's 2 attackers. So we'll never know entirely, because Newcastle got Champions League money. Maybe they only bring in 1 attacker and they put all their money towards it. But I think if it was to be 2 attackers, all signs would point towards an Isak exit. So we can't rule out the possibility of something changing later in the window. But one thing is clear as of today, that Liverpool are not going to put in a second blind bid. They're not going to bid without encouragement. So the ball is now in Isak's court. Does he return to training, or does he dig in his heels? And to some extent, the ball is in Newcastle's recruitment court to see whether they can get in other names. And then at that point, if they call Liverpool up and say, you can now do a deal and we can talk around your 110, then of course Liverpool are not going to shut the door on that. But there's definitely more pessimism than there was this morning prior to tabling that first bid.
Comprehensive update there. Viewers, stick with us. More to come, I think, with overlapping stories as well. But hit the like button if you haven't done so yet. Loads of you watching, so get it liked, get this shared across your social media platforms. In relation to another striker that is connected to this, in Benjamin Sesko, the Newcastle press, Craig Hope, I say colleague, as in you're all journalists, has suggested that Newcastle have pulled away or are looking like they're going to pull away. What's the latest in relation to United closing in on the deal to make Sesko the new number 9 at Old Trafford?
Yeah, Benjamin Sesko pursued by Newcastle and, of course, Manchester United. It's an interesting saga because Newcastle are quite pessimistic. They think Sesko wants to join Manchester United. That's backed up by people I speak to on the player side. But I don't think it's as clear-cut as picking one over the other, because there is a scenario where he has to pick between Champions League and Newcastle or staying at Leipzig. And that's where the different tactics of the clubs come into play. You have Man United, who are hoping to get player buy-in. Then they sense Newcastle will back off. Then when they go to Leipzig, they can maybe get this 75 million euros plus add-ons price to drop a little bit. Maybe they'll succeed. But, of course, Arsenal tried and Andrea Berta when Sesko wanted Arsenal, was not able to drive the price down. But that's certainly Man United's perspective, that you get the yes from the player and then you're in a stronger position with Leipzig. And Leipzig got no European football. They definitely need to bring in some money. So one, if not both, of Siemens and Sesko are going to go. And it's a requirement financially because they're heading into a season without that European money. The Newcastle tactic is different. They're basically saying to Leipzig, we'll pay what it takes. We'll meet your asking price if we need to, in the hope maybe that Manchester United can't match the offer. And then even if Sesko does lean towards Man United over Newcastle, he would have a secondary and straight choice to make. Because if Man United can't agree a fee or get anywhere close and don't want to pay what it takes, and Newcastle do, you, in theory, could get a scenario where the player says, okay, now I'm picking between staying at Leipzig or going to Newcastle. So I don't think it's a hard rejection against Newcastle, but I do think at the moment he's leaning towards Manchester United.
Sounds positive from our point of view. Any updates on the exits from Manchester United? We know that it may be put that your club have kind of stated via, I think, Laurie Whitwell and a few others close to Old Trafford, that sales are not a necessity to get this deal done. But we know we're trying to sell Sancho, of course, Anthony, Garnacho. Anything moving in those parts, Ben?
Yeah, Garnacho's hoping for Chelsea. Obviously, there is a possibility that Villa come calling, but I think Garnacho wants Chelsea. And I get a growing sense that Chelsea will place an offer in some capacity. I just don't know yet if that's going to be a straight permanent transfer in the hope that Man United's price drops. It was 60 odd in January, 50, 55 at the beginning of this window. And some say it's below 50 now, although I think Chelsea's valuation is 35 or 40 million. But there could be a scenario also where Chelsea want to try before they buy, and they try more of a structure like with Jadon Sancho, with a loan, an obligation, but maybe an override or penalty clause. And it remains to be seen whether Manchester United will go for that, because Garnacho's pure profit, and they would ideally like that money to come in now. Yeah. But if they're short of solutions for Garnacho and he's holding out for Chelsea, you never know. They might bend on the structure and back either the penalty money like with Sancho, or alternatively the obligation to be taken. So we'll kind of have to wait and see how that develops. And naturally, there's other moving parts. Like, what if Villa just say Watkins is not for sale? What if Sesko went to Newcastle? I know this is just an extreme example. Do Manchester United then say Nicholas Jackson again? And is that factored into Garnacho talk? So very much a backup plan. Man United are prioritising Sesko. They're quite optimistic on Sesko, but there could be a scenario where if they didn't get Sesko and Villa say Watkins is not for sale, you still need a striker. So I think Garnacho might be something that now develops in the first 2 weeks of August, because Chelsea have waited. They've been working on Xavi Siemens. They've got Gerald Hatto over the line. And now I think we're going to see some movement, and it wouldn't remotely surprise me if Chelsea end up bidding for Garnacho. But let's just wait and see whether that's a straight permanent deal, or if they try and do a similar kind of structure to the one that they did for Jadon Sancho.
Makes perfect sense. Viewers, keep getting that like button hit for us. Comprehensive update on the Sesko situation. Moving to London, what is the latest with Eze to Arsenal? Is a bid expected soon? We know the buyout clause has expired. Arsenal don't seem to be too deterred by that. What's the latest there with Eze potentially becoming a Arsenal player?
Yeah, just also on the Isak situation and others, like people in the chat will say we're sitting on the fence as journalists, but it's actually not sitting on the fence. If you say to me, who's going to win the Premier League? And I go, oh, it could be Chelsea, it could be Arsenal, it could be Man United. That's sitting on the fence. I would give you an opinion. The reason why we're caveating it is because all of these steps for all of these stories haven't happened yet. So you can go on your social media and you can say, someone told me it's going to happen or not going to happen. And they probably stand a 50-50 chance. And one of them is going to look stupid and one of them is going to be correct. But journalism is about telling you the facts as of now. And the facts as of now are very complicated and potentially movable. So your context, if you're going to embrace context for one saga this summer, the most important saga is Isak. Because you've got player power, you've got agent power, you've got Newcastle, you've got Yasser Al-Rumayyan, who's a bit of a wild card in all of this. Because remember, Newcastle United do not have a sporting director. You've got Michael Edwards getting involved. You've got a British transfer record. All now in the space of a month coupled with Newcastle and not so far getting the targets that they've hoped for in the window. So add all of that up. And if you want your black and white, it's going to happen, it's not going to happen, definitive, then you're jumping the gun. So the balance and the context is vital. And if anybody tells you they definitively know what's going on with the future, particularly of Alexander Isak, they're ahead of Yasser Al-Rumayyan, of Eddie Howe, of people within Liverpool's hierarchy. And as journalists, we have to be respectful to the fact that this is a complicated and movable story. So sitting on the fence, if you want to call it that, or balance or caveating, is the best way of approaching a story like this, because you won't cover a more complicated or dramatic story in, I think, a decade of windows than this Alexander Isak story. With Eberechi Eze, it's a little bit simpler. The clause is on the cusp of expiring, £60 million, 8 million in add-ons. Arsenal have never intended to trigger the clause, so whether it expires or not is kind of irrelevant. And they've let Crystal Palace know that in their club-to-club talks. Those club-to-club talks are only initial. Eze in the 10 role is Arsenal's top target. My expectation is a bid is placed and it falls below the clause, and likely after the clause has expired. And then we wait and see whether Crystal Palace's stance is pay or match the clause or walk away. From Arsenal's point of view, they've got player buy-in. They know that Eze wants the move, and they see him as a 10, not a left winger. And because you have Ethan Nwaneri, who can play centrally, because you've got Noni Madueke and Eze that can both move over to the left-hand side, and because you've got Leandro Trossard and Gabriel Martinelli on that left-hand side, and they're quite versatile players as well, a few things need to fall into place here. Some at Arsenal say they want an outgoing, and then they'll place their bid for Eze. Others say they'll finance Eze, and then they'll worry about the chemistry and the outgoings after it. With Martinelli, they'd rather keep the player. With Trossard, they're engaged in contract renewal talks. But I think, as we've said on previous shows, Terry, the extremes are there again, where you can simultaneously hold positive talks with these players and then still sell one of Martinelli or Trossard at the right price. And that's where I think we're at, that Trossard or Martinelli, more likely, I think Trossard at this stage could still be sold. And then Eze can still come in at a number 10, and maybe Arsenal don't strengthen on the left-hand side in addition to the 10, because they know that Eze can go there. They know that Madueke can go there. They know that one or both, depending on what happens of Martinelli and Trossard, so they're well covered. So my expectation is probably just a number 10, with Eze being the top target, and less likely to sign a specialist left winger, because otherwise you're stifling the game time of Madueke. And if you need, Eze can obviously move there. Odegaard can play in that role through the centre. Rice can play in a more advanced position. Havertz can play behind the striker. So I think when you add all of that up, it feels like the last attack-minded reinforcement for Arsenal will be a 10. And this notion of a Rodrigo and Anthony Gordon seems to be less likely at this stage.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in relation to that. And I just wanted to say as well, just in not in your defense, because you don't need it, but in relation to the sort of sitting on the fence thing when it comes to transfers, this is just a lot of old nonsense when it comes to what people like yourself do, because you're talking to, and I'm never going to ask you even privately, and we've spoken privately, and I wouldn't ask. You have your sources, agents, people at clubs, etc., etc., and there is this thing of, I know you wouldn't just print what anyone says without getting confirmation elsewhere, speaking to the other side. You do proper journalistic work, but your job isn't to talk to a football club, for instance. Let's just create a hypothetical. Like Ben's job isn't to speak to a sporting director of a football club, speak to the agent of the player, and they both say, yeah, we've been told Liverpool right now are not going to make a bid unless Newcastle show some want to negotiate. Ben just prints an article saying, been told this, but that's all bollocks. All that's going to end up leading to is Ben not being told anything more by that football club. And then there are people in the comments going, yeah, but well, Ben knows just as much as we do. That's just bullshit, isn't it? That's just absolute bullshit. So, of course, it's as a fan, I've read everything you've said today, everyone. My fan opinion as a football fan is this is still well and truly on. I still think this is going to happen. But I also understand that Liverpool right now, this is what they're saying. And it's important that the journalists give us the right information that's coming out of the football clubs and not just their opinions. I think the world, by and large, has become a bit of a worse place since journalists give their opinions more than the facts of the matter. And it's very, very important that we get that from journalists rather than just their view or opinion or, oh, I'm annoyed at the situation, I'm going to write something that isn't true. That would be a crazy thing to do. There should be a distinction between what fans say and do and what the professional journalists do, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, but also there's this assumption somehow that what we're publishing is a particular side or a particular view or a particular source. And actually,
Oh,
I
you've
can
seen
tell you that.
Scotty? Have you seen Scotty from Geordie Shore? He's been calling all of you guys out for 2 or 3 days.
But the thing is that these kind of stories, believe it or not, you publish a tweet, obviously. And before that, we'd written something for TalkSport. And I've been on air all day, as has chief football correspondent for TalkSport, Alex Crook. So you might read the tweet, or more likely the aggregation that doesn't give the full context of our article or what we've said on air or places like this. But there's this assumption somehow that we just put it out of nowhere. And for me to get to that exclusive, it was about 4 hours worth of straight calls in which I was told they'd bid 100, they'd bid 110, they'd bid 120. They were preparing a second bid. They weren't preparing a second bid. They were confident. They were not confident. Newcastle shut the door. Newcastle opened the door. That Isak was pushing for the move, that Isak was going to sign a new deal, that Liverpool were definitively out, that they might be out, that they weren't out. And then once again, that they were preparing a second bid, all from different people and even conflict between sources in and around the same club. So when you then publish, not only do you have to go back to each source because you've put scrutiny on what they've said, but finally you have to align with a wording that you're comfortable with. And it's not the case that every single person I've spoken today, even people that are in and around the room or in the room, it's not the case that everybody that I've spoken to today is happy with my wording, is happy with my piece, agrees with my piece. Because as a journalist, your job is not to call up someone at a club, take what they say as verbatim and put it out there because they want the message out there. And I think if we'd have done that today, the story would read differently on both sides. So my read from sources is that the Liverpool position today that they don't plan to bid is genuine, but not placing a bid again today, tomorrow, the next day versus pulling out are very different things. So I don't think this saga is over either, but I do think that as of today, Liverpool's position is genuine, that they're not currently preparing a second bid. And for them to prepare a second bid, Newcastle United would have to call them up and offer some direct encouragement.
Yeah.
And the good news is if they do that, the deal is going to happen very quickly. If they don't do that, the deal will not happen at all.
Makes perfect sense to me. In regards to Chelsea, a few updates today from across the continent that Xavi, as he likes to be called, as you told us last time, is closing in on the move to Chelsea. Is that your same understanding that that deal is fairly close?
I think there's a bit of a gulf in valuation, but there's no doubt the player wants the move to Chelsea. Broad personal terms are in place. I said yesterday that I think both players will leave Leipzig, but I think the first to leave Leipzig, that club's going to get a better deal than the second. In other words, if Xavi Simons is done quickly, you might get it for 70 million or under. If Sesko gets done before it, I think Leipzig will dig in on their valuation and vice versa. So it's not really to say either exit is in doubt, because I don't think they are. I just think one club out of Newcastle, Man U for Sesko, or Chelsea for Xavi Simons, or anyone else that may enter that race, your Bayern, your Arsenal, whatever. I think whichever club moves fast will get that Leipzig reduction because they need the money, because they have no European football. And then I think whichever clubs are left for the other player will find negotiations a bit harder and a bit slower, even though I think both eventually will exit the club. So Chelsea are optimistic. People are saying, why they not put in the formal bid? And I explained this yesterday, that when you have a good relationship with a club, you go verbal to try and agree a package. So then when you've put in your formal bid, you feel like it's just a formality. And you sometimes do that out of secrecy, because if you show a formal bid, it tends to get out there. And then when it's out there, every other club sees the valuation. And what if you placed a formal bid and it was close, or it got accepted and it was only 60 million for Xavi Simons? Then you might find Bayern or Arsenal go, oh, okay, that's what they're starting at. We want in. They've done all the legwork for us.
Yep.
Now we're going to come and hijack that. So secrecy is usually easier to maintain in verbal talks that both parties can deny, whereas you often can't hide a formal bid. And this is why I think Chelsea are trying to work discreetly at a lower number than people realize to get it as close as possible without showing their hand.
Which again, I think makes a lot of sense to the vast majority of us. It really does. There's a few comments here. First one says, Isak should tell Newcastle to accept the next bid or he will buy himself out of his contract, which he can do under the FIFA rules. I've seen a lot of people speak about this, these FIFA rules in the last 3 years of your contract. They can just buy themselves out. Is that a plausible option as far as you've been informed?
No, I don't think we'll see a situation where Isak buys himself out. I think we'll see a situation where there's two extremes, like I said before. One is Newcastle will make a ploy now because it's a good window for Newcastle. They can test the player's position and say, come back. And then they can always try and make him a new contract offer and say he can still leave in a year's time. And if he genuinely thinks he's got an out in a year, you never know. And if the player rejects that approach, I don't think you're in a position where he needs to buy himself out. If Isak just went on strike now, said, I'm never coming back, don't care if I'm in breach of my contract, I'm staying at Real Sociedad, I'm unavailable for selection for the first games of the Premier League season. And that's what makes this so complicated, because you haven't just got deadline day, September the 3rd, you've got a week before the Premier League season. And there's no way Eddie Howe is going to want to be speaking every week about where's Isak, why is he not training? Is he available or isn't he available for selection? There's no way Newcastle will want the player to make a statement like, remember, Moises Caicedo did in that January where he nearly moved to Arsenal, because that just adds fuel to the fire. So I don't think we'll see a situation where he has to buy himself out of a contract or anything like that. I think the player's got the biggest decision to make now. Does he think that Newcastle's stance is as genuine as Liverpool do right now? And does he return? And if he returns, then I think within Newcastle, they will take significant encouragement from that. But if he digs in and doesn't return, then you have a whole new snowball that starts, because we're not talking about pre-season. We're not talking about friendlies. We're not talking about tours. We're talking about the Premier League, the greatest league in the world, where the best and most prolific striker, other than perhaps Mo Salah, based upon the last few seasons, is saying, I don't care if I'm a Newcastle United player, I'm simply not playing. And that's when the fan base will fall out with him. That's when the management will fall out with him. That's when the manager will fall out with him. And for me, that's the beginning of the end. So this Liverpool bid and then backing off is very much a test of how hard is Isak prepared to
go
push. And for me, that will define the next step in the saga.
Yep. Glock 9 here says, is Isak okay with not playing before the World Cup?
Another great point. And I think Newcastle will use that to their advantage too, that if they threaten Isak and say, look, you're just not getting your move, then Isak will have to think, okay, is this going to be detrimental? But I think what helps the player in all of this is if Alexander Isak is intent on forcing his way out and burning bridges, which is what he may have to do in the short term, he could do that right up until September the 3rd. And then on September the 4th, he could apologize, sign a new deal, and then still be playing for the vast majority of the season, which is why I think the World Cup won't play a massive influence in all of this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And listen, football fans are fickle. I remember twice United fans turning on Wayne Rooney over transfer requests. As soon as he plays the next first game and scores a goal, everybody was chanting Rooney, Rooney, Rooney again. And football fans are fickle. The same as Newcastle. You know, Liverpool fans that turned on Trent have no problem really with what Isak's doing. Newcastle fans that are calling it out will have no problem in reality when Visser is in their team if they sign him. So that's very true. Look, Ben, I know you're very, very busy indeed. You've got TalkSport coming up very soon and other shows. So we're going to end it there today. Shorter than usual. I'm sure we'll speak again next week. Listen, viewers, everyone who's here, super chatted, liked, subscribed. Thank you. Hit the like button before you go. Please get that done for us, people. This is also going to redirect you to Footy Judge Mo's channel. So go and support my brother over there. unless there's big breaking news, we're back tomorrow morning with more content for you. But until next time, everybody, take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we will see you all again very, very soon. Peace.